Am I unmuted now? Okay, my apologies, everybody. I managed to mute myself. Let's start again. Susan Gillis here, curator of the Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum. This is our virtual lecture series, Boca History 101. We have muted your microphones. Please don't unmute and don't click the video because we're recording this session. If you miss an episode or like to review, just contact us at research@bocahistory.org, and we will provide you with a link to the recording. So today we're going to wind up my overview of Boca Raton history, Boca Raton, A Brief History, Part 3. So last time we ended up with World War II, 1947 brings a terrible storm, which effectively closes the Boca Raton Army Airfield. And that was a great financial blow, really, to the community. And we'll talk more about that in the World War II lecture. But we have in Florida, thousands and thousands of young men who were stationed here during the war, particularly those from northern climes. Think Florida is just dandy. And they return in massive numbers with their new young families in tow. Secondly, air conditioning, which had been around for a while. Finally, by the 50s, you can purchase relatively inexpensive and safe wall or window units. And you can see my ad at left. Those prices seem a little high to me, particularly considering the 1950s, but nonetheless, better than suffering through the heat in the summer. By 1960s, we have lots of brochures from real estate developments that were began in the 1960s, and especially by the late 60s, central air becomes standard with Florida housing, particularly in the condos and so on. More importantly, in my opinion, than air conditioning, pest control, by World War II, DDT is invented, and it's very, very effective against flying pests, particularly mosquitoes. And in the post-war era, you have mosquito taxing districts, and counties and other agencies are applying malathion by air, as you can see it, right, from trucks on the ground and even by boat in our waterways. And of course, all the little kids like to follow those mosquito trucks on their bikes, which probably explains a lot about the world today. Boca had the siren call of our beaches, which we've always had. Believe it or not, low-cost housing was a draw here, particularly for the retirement age folks. And you have the rise of the condominium in the 60s and no Florida income taxes. So this is beautiful downtown Boca Raton in the late 40s, early 50s. This is Federal Highway looking north from about Southeast 5th Street. So Palmetto Park Road is in the distance. And before this, Dixie Highway was the principal north-south drag. And it was still 2-lane at this time. But once Federal is widened, a lot more starts to happen on Federal Highway, and it becomes the main north-south drag. So our modern Chamber of Commerce was founded in '52. This is their first office. It was actually located catty corner across from Town Hall, so on the east side of the street, but up just north just a little bit. In the background, just picture Meisner Park. And you can see the members are eagerly awaiting visitors from the north. So if you go outside the chamber building and look south, this would be your view. In 1958, the traffic light is actually Boca Raton Road, which was still through what is today Sanborn Park. And you can see that Town Hall is attired for some patriotic holiday. So the city is able to acquire a lot of these former air base lands and buildings to offer to investors and new businesses, to bring industry, new businesses, new residents to town. So one of the people to take advantage of that is this man, Ira Eshelman. He was an evangelist, and he purchases lands and old World War II buildings west of what is today's City Hall complex, kind of along Northwest 4th Avenue, north of Palmetto Park Road, to create the Bible Conference Grounds, which is commonly known as Bibletown, a Christian resort community in the 1950s. So he has an auditorium, a movie theater, a big recreation building that are all World War II buildings. He builds a motel, there's a pool. Eventually, the Starlight condominiums, Paradise Palms, Conference Estates are all part of the Bibletown. Very successful, very popular resort, and it also brings new residents to the area. Now, Bibletown boasted for many years the largest auditorium in town and played host to many outstanding performers and celebrities, and the public were able to enjoy that. Today, Bibletown survives as the Boca Raton Community Church. So we talked about the tourist attraction Ancient America in our first episode, but we can't forget Africa USA, which was about where the Camino Gardens neighborhood is today. You entered off of Dixie Highway, and this was an African safari park. So it really was a predecessor to Lion Country Safari, Busch Gardens, Tampa, and so on. And it was quite popular and successful. It actually was on the cover of Life magazine. That was very hot stuff back in the day. So there are lots of new real estate developments coming online in the 1950s. One of them was Winfield Park, particularly between Dixie and Federal and east of Federal Highway. Winfield Park still exists, of course. This is a view from 20th Street and 4th Way, so that's east of Dixie Highway. And you know what? It still kind of looks just like this. Please notice the presence of carports and very, very substantial examples of Detroit steel in the driveways. Back when cars were real cars. So I want to talk about the 60s and forward, and I'm going to focus on a few specific issues that helped shape our community. First of all, Arvida and real estate development, education, and international business machines, IBM. Our population in 1950 was under 1,000. By 60, it's 7,000. By 70, it's 28,500. And of course, we just keep growing. So let's talk about Arvida. Well, first of all, Mr. Shine, J. Meyer Shine, here left, purchased the Boca Raton Club in 1944 and a great deal of land in Boca Raton. Shine was a hotelier. He owned a lot of other hotels. He also owned movie theaters. And under his ownership, there was a lot of renovations done to the hotel. The antiques some of them were painted white. It was under his ownership that the hotel was painted pink outside. But he also opens the facilities like the Cabana Club and the golf course to the locals off seasons, and this really hadn't been done before. Mrs. Shine was very active in the community. She helped establish the Art Guild, which today is the Art Museum, the library. She helped raise funds to build the Boca Raton Methodist Church, and she even paid for improvements at Town Hall. So they were very, very active in the community. So in 1956, Arthur Vining Davis, that short guy between the polo players, purchases the hotel and a great deal of Boca Raton. A lot of farmland, a lot of Mr. Butt's bean fields, as well as property in Broward, Dade County, the islands, and so on. Now, Davis at the time was the 9th wealthiest person in the world. He was 89. Apparently, he could not retire. And he forms Arvida, which stands for Arthur Blaine Davis. And number one, he brings polo to town in 1957. But Arvida continues his dream of development. And it's under the Arvida era that the hotel makes fully the transition from a part-time social resort hotel, you know, just open for a few months a year, to a full-time convention hotel, which just makes sense in the modern world. How can you have a hotel that's only open 3 months a year and pay for everything? So they added air conditioning, and they build the modernistic tower that still stands. It's completed in 1969, and also extend the seawalls on the east facade of the hotel so they can moor yachts and charter boats there. So Arvida, as a developer, becomes arguably the most successful real estate company in the history of our state, probably in the US. Eventually it was owned by Disney. That's how successful it was. And I made a list of some of the Arvida projects in town, just off the top of my head. I know I don't have all of them. The first Arvida project was Royal Palm Yacht and Country Club, which opened in '59. Still a very, very beautiful part of town. But you can see Arvida did a lot of condominiums like the Addison, Boca Inlet, I believe that was their first. It's right next to the hotel. Arvida Country Club, the Park of Commerce, Boca West, Broken Sound, Estancia, Mill Pond, Paseos, Disabled Point Condominiums, Timber Creek, Town Center, Town Place, University Park. Arvida really helps establish the gated community as a signature of Boca Raton. But they aren't the only game in town. In the 60s, there were a lot of new developments. Two of the local favorites are Royal Oak Hills and Camino Gardens. There were many more. Boca Square, I know you guys are out there. But this continues in the 1980s. This just happens to be one of my favorite pictures of the Woodville Hunt Club, which was a barber project. And I understand that Woodfield Hunt Club once was a hunt club. At the left, we have a picture looking east. That's Camino Real towards the beach in the late 40s, so after the war, versus 2012. So we see condos springing up along the beach. Arvida had a lot to do with many of those. Now, before the 60s, we did have co-ops under construction. That's a different story in Boca Raton. But Atlantic Cloisters, which is this low rise south of the inlet on A1A, purports to be the oldest condo in the US. I did some research on that, and they're not the only condominium to claim that. However, it's certainly oldest in our state, and it still stands, and it still enjoys good occupancy, Atlantic Cloisters. Another one of my favorite pictures. So in the late 60s, Boca West begins. You can see, this is actually the golf course under construction. Boca West was initially the country club of the Boca Resort, the Boca Hotel and Club back then. And under construction in the late 60s, the condominiums and so on come along later after the 1970s. Now at left, you can see that's the Turnpike. Today it's a Reagan Turnpike. We called it the Sunshine State Parkway. And when it opened in 1957, there was no Boca exit. Boca was considered too podunk to qualify for an exit. So Arvida essentially made a interchange at Glades Road happen. So we owe our interchange at Glades to Arvida. They needed access to all their new developments that were coming online. The horizontal line there, that's Glades Road. And in the foreground, that's the Sunstream Groves, which was a citrus grove. Today it's Boca Grove. And look in the distance. What do you see? I see bean fields. I see cultivation. They're no longer, of course. So let's talk about education a little bit. So in the post-war era, we've got a lot of new residents and demand for education. 1959, we get the J.C. Mitchell School for public school. Initially, it was a grade school, but very quickly morphed into a junior high, for those of you who remember those. That's what we call middle school now. There were a lot of private schools in town. One is the Hollybrook Academy, which was in a beautiful old house, the Howe Mansion, located where the Waterstone is, and that's in the late 60s. Very importantly, all these years, our high school age students had to go to Delray Beach to go to school, to high school. And finally, Boca gets its own high school in 1963. And Marymount College, today Lynn University, is established in 1962. Another one of my favorite pictures, here's St. Andrew's School in 62. Arvida actually donated the land for St. Andrews and Marymount. And you can see in the western provinces where there's a lot of nothing. This is a view looking west. And I pulled up a Google Earth view for you so you can kind of get oriented. I think that the picture on the right needs no comment. Well, of all these institutions, one kind of holds the greatest importance for our community, and that's Florida Atlantic. So the city was able to acquire property from the former airfield, as I mentioned, and they're able to use the former runways of the base to lure the newest state university to town, what we call Florida Atlantic University. It was originally called Boca U. Don't you love that? And FAU owes in part its existence to that man shaking hands with LBJ, Tom Fleming, but also our other local citizens. And remember, Boca was a pretty small town, but apparently we had very good political connections in the state. And so we made it happen. FAU is supposed to open October 64, the day Hurricane Cleo struck, which was a very bad omen. And the initial enrollment was not as expected. It was pretty disappointing. Now, back then, FAU was only junior and senior year. And the idea was there were new community colleges springing up all over the state. They call them junior colleges that housed freshmen and sophomore, and this was a feeder school. Now, that's all changed, of course, today. Today, FAU, very, very successful enrollment. I'm sure it's well over 30,000, multiple campuses. And here you see a picture from World War II and 2012, already outdated photograph that, again, needs no explanation. The yellow line at left is the Amtrak tracks, CSX tracks. The yellow line on the right is the El Rio Canal, which is the eastern boundaries of Florida Atlantic. And of course, you see our airport. And we'll talk more about this in our World War II talk. FAU, of course, has brought thousands and thousands of not only students, but faculty, administrators, all the services that need to make a large university run. And the wonderful things that a college town can do for a college town. Let's talk a little bit about IBM. So IBM decides to start buying property in Boca, in the wilds of West Boca, west of what is today I-95, in '66. And they come to build one of their smaller mainframe computers. They actually lease a lot of buildings, but they construct this very interesting building, which I call the main complex, west of today's 95, between Spanish River Boulevard and Yamato. And it was designed by very famous architect Marcel Breuer and Robert Gatchie in what's called a brutalist style. And this is not something you would find on a house. It's industrial commercial tile architecture that celebrates the components of the building, the structure itself. So it couldn't be more different than Mediterranean Revival. But it's a wonderful example and still stands, as you can see. Today, it's the home of the Boca Raton Innovation Campus. Now, IBM Boca was responsible for many wonderful innovations, wonderful technology, all sorts of systems, robotics, all sorts of things over the years. But the one most of us are familiar with is the PC. So it was in 1981 that the Boca Raton campus manufactures IBM's foray into the personal computer market, the IBM PC. And anyone who has a PC as opposed to a Mac, this is great grandmommy. They're all knockoffs in this sense. And you can see the PS2 under manufacture. Many other wonderful things happened at IBM Boca Raton. I'd like to mention some of those. For instance, voice recognition technology came from IBM Boca via voice, Dragon Speak, so on. Computers for the hearing and sight impaired, translation software, just many wonderful accomplishments can be chalked up to IBM Boca Raton. Now, we, the Historical Society, have an ever-growing collection of vintage IBM PCs. I have multiple copies of all of them. Please don't try and donate yours to me because I already have one. But we have a lot of memorabilia, and that will be a feature of our new exhibits. There will be a room dedicated to IBM Boca Raton. It was such an important impact on the community. In the 80s, Boca becomes IBM PC operations and Boca becomes a Silicon Beach, attracting many other high-tech industries. High-tech industries are, of course, very desirable in a community because they have a low impact on the environment, but they bring a lot of well-educated, relatively well-paid people to town with their desires for higher education for their families, cultural institutions, religious institutions, and so on. So it's all good. Unfortunately, starting in the 80s, IBM Boca began to downsize. By the mid-90s, most of the operations had been relocated, and we went from 12,000 employees down to much smaller than that. And this is a negative impact on the economy. Now, I want to mention that IBM Boca still exists in a form. It's IBM Florida today, but IBM no longer a manufacturing company. They've taken a very different direction. And of course, a lot of employees work remotely. Okay, let's talk about the reactions to this. Development pushback. So as early as '72, the citizens of Boca Raton passed a referendum to cap the growth of the city at 40,000 residential units, not people, units. Well, long story short, that is struck down in '76 by the Palm Beach County Circuit Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court and the state Supreme Court refused to hear it on appeal. However, by '79, the city had adopted a land use plan placing density ceilings on properties in the city. Now, this is obviously not an issue that has gone away because still very much is discussed, particularly in the downtown area. What I want to focus on is this article, which is so interesting. It appeared in the Times in 1973, and you can see it says, "Rich Boca Raton decides it's time to stop growing." And not only that, there's a picture of a guy selling champagne from an ice cream cart at a polo grounds. So if you wonder where Boca's snooty tooty reputation came from, you can look back to this. Meanwhile, we have condos springing up on the beach like mushrooms. Here's one of them, San Remo. We love San Remo. It's 53 years old. Holy smokes! And you could buy a model for $14,000 back then. And it's just south of Spanish River Park. And we have some beach bunnies from San Remo for your viewing pleasure. So, blessedly, the citizens of Boca Raton and City Council decide, hey, we're not going to have any beach left. It's going to look like Miami Beach. And so they pass a series of bonds to purchase beachfront property in the 60s and 70s. And the result is our beautiful beachfront park, Spanish River Park, Red Reef Park, and South Beach Park. 95 is finally finished through Boca in 75 and completed through South Florida in 76. And of course, this means that West Boca is even more accessible than it has ever been. It really opens up the development in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and it's still growing. Town Center Mall opens not exactly in the center of town in 1980. So one of the reactions to many of our older buildings being demolished and so on is the establishment of the Boca Raton Historical Society in 1972 and our city's Historic Preservation Board in the 70s. And the Historical Society over the years, we continue to be a preservation advocacy group. And I've got to say, we've lost a lot of battles, but we've won some as well. And we continue to see it's our duty to try and save these tangible links with our community's past. Downtown was getting kind of derelict, not looking too good by 1980. A lot of retail is drawn out west by the opening of Town Center Mall and so on. And as a result, the Community Redevelopment Agency is formed, the CRA, to encourage downtown development. One of the first projects sanctioned by CRA is actually the restoration of our old town hall by the Boca Raton Historical Society for its home and museum, which it still is today. And you can see that under construction in about 83, 84. And of course, one of the most famous CRA projects, Tom Crocker's Meisner Park, which was opened as a retail, cultural park, residential development, opens officially in 91, was very controversial then and is still somewhat controversial, but a draw to downtown. So here we have a then and now for you, 1960 and 2012. And so I know 2012 is already well outdated. So this is, whoop, sorry about that. This is Federal Highway right here. And this right here, this is Palmetto Park Road, okay? So Town Hall's right here. Right here, this is going to be the Boca Mall, and then it's going to be Meisner Park. Here's an aerial view from the wartime of the entire city. From 2012. And of course, West Boca's not even pictured. And sort of a then and now for you. So I know there's several decades of Boca history I didn't include here, and I've got to tell you, it's quite a challenge to get a perspective on recent history. And so that's something that's going to have to wait for the future when I have time to research and put things together for you. But I hope you've enjoyed this retrospective on our community's history. Next time, we're going to be concentrating on the pioneer era, and I think you will enjoy that. You probably will see a lot of images and information that maybe you haven't seen before. So thank you for joining us.